The airport always felt different before sunrise. It was quiet, almost peaceful, like the world had not fully woken up yet. The bright runway lights glowed against the dark sky, and the cold morning air carried the smell of fuel and metal. Most people only saw airports when they were rushing to catch flights, dragging suitcases behind them. Very few noticed the workers who had already been there for hours before the first announcement echoed through the terminal. He was one of those workers. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., he pushed his cleaning cart through the wide glass doors. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the empty lobby welcomed him with silence. He liked that silence. It gave him time to think before the noise of the day began. He wore a simple blue uniform with his name stitched above the pocket. The fabric was slightly faded from years of washing. His shoes were practical, worn at the edges, but clean. He took pride in keeping even the smallest things neat. That was just the kind of man he was. He began his shift the same way every day. First, he wiped down the check-in counters. Then he swept near the waiting area chairs. He worked carefully, not rushing, but never wasting time either. He knew which corners collected the most dust and which windows showed fingerprints as soon as the sun came up. Most travelers never looked at him twice. Some walked past while speaking loudly on their phones. Some stepped around his cart without making eye contact. A few offered a polite nod. He never expected more than that, but there was more to him than the mop in his hands. Years ago, he had stood in a very different part of the airport. Back then, he wore a reflective vest and carried tools instead of cleaning supplies. He had worked in aircraft maintenance for 8 years. He knew engines the way some people knew their favorite songs, by sound, by rhythm, by feel. He could often tell what was wrong just by listening. Life, however, does not always follow careful plans. After his wife passed away suddenly from an illness, everything changed. His daughter was only 5 at the time. She did not understand why her mother was not coming home. She only knew that her father now packed her lunch, tied her hair before school, and sat beside her at night when she was afraid of the dark. Aircraft maintenance had long hours and unpredictable schedules. Sometimes he was called in late at night. Sometimes he had to travel to other cities for days at a time. He could not do that anymore. His daughter needed him home every evening. So he made a decision that surprised many of his old co-workers. He left the maintenance crew and accepted a janitor position at the same airport. The hours were steady. The pay was lower, but the schedule allowed him to pick his daughter up from school every day. He never complained. On this particular morning, the sky was still dark when he finished cleaning near Gate 3. Through the large windows, he could see a private charter jet parked on the runway. It was sleek and white, with a narrow blue stripe along its side. Even from a distance, it looked powerful. Private jets usually meant important passengers. He had learned not to stare, but sometimes he couldn't help admiring the machines. They were more than metal to him. They were systems of precision. Every bolt, every wire, every sensor had a purpose. As he emptied a trash bin near the side exit, he heard it, a sharp whirring sound, followed by a strange pause. He froze. The jet's engine had attempted to start. He waited. Again, the engine turned over. A low rumble tried to build, but it faded quickly. Then silence. His hands tightened slightly around the trash bag. He knew that sound. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. Engines could fail to start for many reasons. Maybe it was routine. Maybe the crew was simply running checks. He stepped outside to replace the liner in an exterior bin, giving himself a clearer view of the runway. A small group of ground crew members stood near the aircraft, talking into headsets. One of them signaled toward the cockpit. The engine tried again. This time, the sound lasted longer. It almost caught, almost roared to life, but then it choked and died. He felt something twist in his chest. That was not a normal failed start. He had heard that uneven rhythm before. It was subtle, something most people would ignore. But to him, it sounded like a breath that couldn't fully fill the lungs. A young ground technician jogged toward the side of the aircraft. Another crew member climbed a small ladder to inspect something near the wing. Their movements were calm but slightly tense. Inside the jet, silhouettes moved behind the small oval windows. Important people, most likely, people with schedules that did not allow for delays. He told himself again to mind his own work. He went back inside and continued mopping the floor near the terminal entrance. The smooth strokes of the mop usually cleared his thoughts. Today they didn't. The engine sound echoed again in his mind. Fuel-air mixture, sensor delay, possible condensation buildup. He shook his head slightly. It was not his responsibility anymore. He wore a janitor's badge now. He had not touched an aircraft tool in years. Still, his ears could not ignore what they heard. Minutes passed. The sky began to lighten with soft shades of purple and orange. The first airport announcements crackled through the speakers, welcoming early passengers. Outside, the jet remained on the runway. Another ignition attempt. The engine spun, hesitated, then failed again. He saw one of the pilots step down briefly, speaking to a supervisor. The supervisor crossed his arms, looking frustrated. A phone was pressed to someone's ear. Delays cost money. He knew that well. He leaned against his cart for a moment, pretending to adjust the cleaning supplies while watching through the glass. He thought of his daughter at home, still asleep. He had left a small note on the kitchen table for her, as he did every morning. Breakfast is in the fridge. I'll see you after school. Be brave today. She liked those notes. She kept them in a small box in her room. He worked this job for her. He reminded himself of that often. But another failed ignition attempt pulled him back to the present. This time, the engine made a sharper sputtering sound before cutting off. He inhaled slowly. That was it. He knew that pattern. The uneven combustion. The slight delay before shutdown. It was small. It was simple. And it was fixable. His heart began to beat faster. He argued with himself. What if he was wrong? What if he embarrassed himself? What if they laughed? He had not been part of the maintenance team in years. They might not even remember him. A group of passengers began gathering near the private terminal entrance. A well-dressed woman stood slightly apart, speaking firmly into her phone. Even from inside, he could see the tension in her posture. The supervisor outside removed his headset and rubbed his forehead. Another attempt. Another failure. He set the mop upright in the bucket. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the aircraft through the wide glass window. He could walk away, finish his shift, go home. No one would blame him, but the sound would stay in his mind all day. Finally, he took a slow breath. He wiped his hands on a clean cloth and stepped toward the side exit that led closer to the runway area. His pace was steady, not rushed. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He only wanted to speak. As he stepped outside, the cold air brushed against his face. The ground crew barely noticed him at first. He stopped a few feet away, waiting respectfully until the supervisor turned. "Sir," he said calmly. The supervisor glanced at him, slightly confused. "Yes." He swallowed once, choosing his words carefully. "I know I'm not part of the crew anymore," he began, keeping his voice steady. "But I worked maintenance here for 8 years. That engine, it doesn't sound electrical." The supervisor looked at him more closely now. He continued, not defensive, just honest. "It sounds like a fuel-air misfire. Maybe condensation, near a sensor line. If you let me listen once more, I think I can point it out." There was a brief silence between them. The engine inside the jet whirred again, struggling to catch. He met the supervisor's eyes and said quietly, "Just give me 60 seconds." The wind moved lightly across the runway. The sky was brighter now. The day was beginning. And for the first time in years, he was no longer just a man with the mop. The supervisor did not answer right away. He looked at the man in the blue janitor uniform as if trying to place him in a memory. The engine behind him attempted to turn over again, the sound rough and uneven. It failed once more. Around them, the pressure was rising. One of the ground crew members shook his head and muttered, "We already checked the primary systems." Another tapped rapidly on a tablet, scrolling through diagnostics. The pilot's voice came through a headset, tight and impatient. The supervisor crossed his arms. "You said you worked maintenance?" "Yes, sir," he replied calmly. 8 years. Right here." A younger technician nearby let out a small laugh. "With all respect, we got certified engineers on this." He didn't react to the comment. He had heard worse in life. Instead, He kept his eyes on the supervisor. "I'm not asking to take over," he said. "I'm just asking to listen closely once more. If I'm wrong, I'll walk back inside and finish my shift." Another ignition attempt began. The engine spun. For a second, it almost caught properly. Then it coughed and died again. The supervisor looked back at the aircraft. His jaw tightened. Delays like this were not small matters. The passengers were important. The flight had a tight departure window. The well-dressed woman near the private terminal was no longer on the phone. She was watching now, clearly aware something was wrong. Two assistants stood near her, whispering. The supervisor exhaled slowly. "You've got 60 seconds, he said finally, "but you don't touch anything unless I say so." "That's fair," he replied. The younger technician rolled his eyes but stepped aside. He walked closer to the aircraft, his heart steady but heavy. It had been years since he stood this close to a jet in a technical way. The smell of fuel, the low hum of ground power units, the sight of the turbine blades, all felt familiar, almost like stepping into a past version of himself. The pilot opened the small cockpit window slightly. "What's going on down there?" "Just checking one more thing," the supervisor called back. He stood still and listened. "Try ignition again," he said gently. The pilot complied. The engine began to spin. He closed his eyes for a second, blocking out the movement around him and focusing only on the sound. He listened past the main roar, past the surface vibration. He listened for the uneven rhythm hidden underneath. There it was, a slight delay between fuel intake and proper combustion, a hesitation, like a stutter in a sentence. He opened his eyes and stepped slightly toward the lower access panel area near the wing root. "Right there," he said quietly, pointing. "That sensor line." The younger technician frowned. "We ran diagnostics on that." "I'm not saying it's dead," he replied calmly. "I'm saying it might be wet." The technician blinked. "Wet?" "Condensation," he explained. "It's cold this morning. If moisture built up overnight, it could be interfering just enough to throw off the mixture reading. The system thinks something's wrong, so it cuts the ignition before full startup." The supervisor looked at the technician. "Check it." The technician hesitated for a second, clearly not thrilled about taking advice from someone in a janitor's uniform. But under the supervisor's stare, he grabbed his tools and opened the panel. A few seconds passed. Then the technician's expression changed. "There's moisture," he admitted quietly. "Not a lot, but it's there." The supervisor leaned in closer. "Dry it. Check the line." The technician carefully wiped the connection and adjusted the fitting slightly. The man in the blue uniform stepped back, giving them space. He didn't smile. He didn't look proud. He simply watched, hoping he was right. After a short moment, the panel was closed again. The supervisor looked up at the cockpit. "Try it." The engine began to spin once more. This time, the hesitation was shorter. The engine caught. A deep, powerful roar filled the morning air as the turbine blades accelerated smoothly. The uneven rhythm was gone. The sound was clean, steady, confident. Everyone froze for half a second. Then the relief hit all at once. The younger technician stepped back, staring at the engine in disbelief. The supervisor allowed himself a small breath of laughter, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. The pilot's voice came through the headset, surprised but satisfied. "That's what I'm talking about." The engine continued running smoothly, stable and strong. He felt a wave of quiet relief move through him. Not pride, not victory, just relief. The well-dressed woman near the terminal began walking toward them, her heels clicking firmly against the pavement. The assistants followed behind her. "Is it fixed?" she asked the supervisor. "Yes," he replied. "We're good to go." Her eyes shifted toward the man standing slightly apart from the crew. "Who found it?" There was a brief pause. The younger technician looked uncomfortable. The supervisor glanced at the man in blue. "He did," the supervisor said simply. She studied him for a moment. Her gaze moved from his worn shoes to his calm face. There was no arrogance there. No demand for recognition. "You're part of the maintenance team?" she asked. He shook his head gently. "No, ma'am. I cleaned the terminal." There was a flicker of surprise in her expression. "You cleaned the terminal," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." She looked back at the aircraft, then at the supervisor. And he just saved us from a canceled flight? The supervisor nodded. Seems that way. The engine continued humming steadily in the background. For a moment, no one spoke. Then she stepped closer to him. Thank you, she said directly. He wasn't used to being thanked like that. He nodded slightly. I'm glad it worked. What's your background? She asked. I used to work maintenance here, he replied. A few years back. And now I work mornings, he said simply. There was no bitterness in his voice. Just fact. She studied him for another second, as if trying to understand the story behind that simple answer. But the pilot signaled that they needed a board. She extended her hand. He hesitated for half a heartbeat before shaking it. You gave us more than 60 seconds, she said. You gave us our schedule back. He offered a small, respectful smile. Safe flight, ma'am. She turned and walked back toward the jet. The assistants followed, whispering to each other. The younger technician avoided eye contact, clearly rethinking his earlier reaction. The supervisor stepped closer. Why didn't you ever say you had that kind of experience? He asked. He shrugged lightly. It wasn't part of the job description. The supervisor let out a short breath of disbelief. You could have just walked away. Yes, he agreed. But I didn't want to hear that sound all day knowing I could have helped. The jet began taxiing slowly down the runway. He stepped back, watching as it picked up speed. Within moments, it lifted into the brightening sky, smooth and strong. The morning sun finally broke fully over the horizon, casting golden light across the airport. The supervisor looked at him again, this time differently. Not as a janitor, not as an interruption, but as someone who clearly belonged near aircraft. You ever think about coming back? The supervisor asked quietly. He looked down at his hands for a moment. They were steady, still capable. I think about my daughter first, he replied. The supervisor nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. Well, he added, today you reminded a lot of people not to judge by uniforms. He didn't answer that. He simply picked up his cleaning cart again. As he walked back toward the terminal doors, a few ground crew members gave him small nods. Not dramatic, not loud, but respectful. Inside, the airport was fully awake now. Travelers moved through security lines. Announcements echoed overhead. The normal rhythm of the day had returned. He parked his cart near the same spot where it stood earlier, staring through the window. Only now, the runway was empty. He dipped the mop back into the bucket and continued cleaning the floor as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had changed. Not in the airport, in the way people looked at him. And maybe just a little in the way he looked at himself. The moment the engine finally roared to life, a strange quiet settled over the small group on the tarmac. It was not the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. It was the kind of quiet that comes when everyone realizes something unusual just happened. Something that no one expected. Something that mattered. The young technician, still staring at the spinning turbines, seemed frozen. He glanced at the supervisor, who raised his eyebrows and let out a long breath. Relief, yes, but also a dawning recognition that the man in the janitor uniform had just solved a problem that had eluded the best-trained engineers on site. The pilot leaned out slightly from the cockpit window, his face a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. I don't know what you did, but the engines are steady, smooth as silk. His tone was professional, but there was a hint of disbelief, almost admiration. The janitor didn't respond. He stood a little back from the aircraft, his hands tucked neatly behind him. He felt a small tightening in his chest, a mixture of nerves and quiet pride. But he didn't want to make this about him. This was never about recognition. It was about doing the right thing, about preventing a disaster, about making sure the passengers could reach their destination safely. The woman who had been waiting near the terminal started walking toward the group again. Her heels clicked against the tarmac in a rhythm that made him glance at her. She carried herself with the kind of authority that made people instinctively step aside, but her eyes were soft now, filled with curiosity and a measure of respect. You did that? She asked, her voice steady, but there was an edge of wonder in it. You fixed it? He nodded slightly. I didn't fix it, he said. I just noticed something. Something the sensors and diagnostics couldn't pick up on. Moisture in a sensor line. That's all. Moisture? One of her assistants echoed, glancing at the janitor in disbelief. All that for moisture? He shrugged lightly. Sometimes the smallest things cause the biggest problems, he said. It was a simple sentence, but it carried more weight than anyone realized. The supervisor stepped closer to him, lowering his voice so that only the two of them could hear. You didn't have to say anything. You could have kept walking, finished your shift. Most people would have. He shook his head. I couldn't. That sound. I know it. I've heard it before. I couldn't ignore it. Not knowing I could help, that would have been worse. The supervisor nodded slowly, almost silently agreeing. There was a respect forming between them now, unspoken but clear. This man, with a mop and a bucket, had reminded everyone that experience didn't disappear just because someone changed roles or chose a quieter life. The woman in charge, now standing closer, looked at him as if trying to read the story behind the calm expression on his face. So, you used to work in maintenance? She asked again, almost rhetorically. He nodded. Years ago, before my daughter was born, before life changed. He didn't explain more. He didn't need to. She saw the hint of loss in his eyes anyway. Some things don't need words. Some stories are written in silence. Why aren't you in maintenance now? She asked softly. There was no judgment in her voice, only genuine curiosity. He smiled faintly, almost sadly, because my daughter needed me. I couldn't be gone for days, for weeks, constantly traveling for jobs. She was too young. She needed a father more than I needed a career. The woman's expression softened. She glanced at the crew, the technicians, the supervisor, then back at him. And now you're a janitor, she said. Cleaning floors while airplanes sit right here waiting for someone like you? He shrugged again. I'm still here, still doing what I can. His voice was quiet, almost matter-of-fact, but there was a strength in it, a weight that made the words land harder than any speech could have. One of the younger technicians finally spoke, hesitantly. So all this time, you just kept it to yourself? He looked at him. Life doesn't always let you do what you want. You adjust. You adapt. You do what you have to. The crew, previously skeptical, now looked at him in a new light. Their earlier doubts, their small sneers, were gone. They realized they had underestimated him. The uniform had told them one story, but the truth told a different one. The supervisor cleared his throat. Well, I think we all just learned an important lesson about judging people by what they look like. He turned to the woman. This man knows this airport and its machines better than most of us. She nodded, silently acknowledging the truth of that. Then she extended her hand toward him. Thank you. Truly, you didn't have to do that. He shook her hand politely. I just wanted to help. There was a pause. She studied him again, trying to understand the quiet confidence he carried. Then she smiled slightly. You reminded all of us that expertise isn't about titles. It's about what you know and how you act when it matters. He nodded, though he felt no need to bask in praise. Pride wasn't why he had stepped forward. He had stepped forward because it was right, because it was necessary. The jet's engines purred steadily now, ready for takeoff. The passengers were boarding, unaware of just how close they had come to a canceled flight. Only a few had glimpsed the quiet man in blue standing by, calm and unassuming, who had prevented disaster with nothing but experience and instinct. He stepped back on the tarmac, pushing his mop cart slowly. The morning air was cool against his skin, and the airport was alive now with the sound of people, announcements, and rolling luggage. The normal rhythm of the day resumed around him, but he moved through it as if in a separate world. The supervisor watched him go, admiration clear in his eyes. Not bad for a janitor, he muttered under his breath, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The woman in charge glanced back at him one last time before climbing into the jet. There was a respect there that could not be ignored, a silent acknowledgement that some people's worth cannot be measured by their job title. The janitor returned to the terminal, quietly finishing his cleaning tasks. He wiped down counters, swept the floors, and restocked supplies, all while carrying the invisible weight of what had just happened. No one stopped him. No one asked him for details. That was fine. He didn't need recognition. For him, the work The life he had chosen was enough. His daughter would be waiting for him at home. She needed him, and he needed her. That was priority. The engines, the passengers, the business executives, they were in good hands now, and he had played his part. As he moved through the terminal, he passed travelers chatting, laughing, rushing to catch their flights. Some glanced at him briefly. A few smiled politely. Others ignored him completely. He didn't mind. Recognition had never been part of the plan. What mattered was knowing he had done the right thing when it counted. That was enough. That had always been enough. He finished mopping a long stretch of floor near the waiting area. The sunlight was now stronger, streaming through the wide windows and reflecting off polished surfaces. He paused for a moment, looking outside at the runway where the jet had roared to life. It would take off soon. Its passengers would never know the quiet man in blue who had given them that smooth ride. But that didn't matter. He had made a difference, and in that, there was quiet satisfaction. Life had taught him to move forward, to focus on what mattered most, to act when necessary. And today he had acted. He had not hesitated. He had not walked away. The morning continued, the airport busy and alive. But in the middle of it all, a single janitor carried a story that few would ever know. He carried it quietly, as he always did, with dignity, skill, and a sense of purpose that could not be measured by uniforms or job titles. And somewhere inside, he felt a quiet, unspoken pride. Not loud, not showy, just steady, just real. This was who he was, and he was at peace with that. The engine's roar still echoed faintly in his memory as he continued his work. The day moving forward, the passengers safe, and the world still turning. He had made a difference. And that was enough. The jet had finally disappeared into bright morning sky, leaving the runway clear and the hum of activity slowly returning to normal. The airport staff went back to their routines. Passengers scurried to gates. Announcements echoed overhead, and luggage trolleys clattered across the polished floors. But in a quiet corner near the hangar, a different story was unfolding. The supervisor had walked back toward the janitor, keeping his hands in his pockets. His expression was thoughtful, almost careful, like he was weighing how to say something. The young technician trailed behind, his earlier disbelief replaced by curiosity. Even some of the other ground crew had stopped what they were doing, peeking over shoulders, whispering softly among themselves. The janitor was restocking supplies in his cart, moving deliberately, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But the supervisor didn't wait any longer. "Wait," he said, calling him over. The janitor looked up, slightly surprised. "I want to talk for a minute." He walked over, his mop cart rolling smoothly beside him. The supervisor studied him carefully. "Why didn't you ever tell us you had that experience? That you knew so much about these engines?" He paused, considering his answer. "It wasn't about hiding it," he said quietly. "I had to make a choice. My daughter was 5 when her mother passed away. I had to be there. Maintenance work requires long, unpredictable hours. I couldn't be gone for days or weeks at a time. She needed me more than I needed the job." The supervisor nodded slowly. "I understand that. I really do. But still, you've saved us more than just a lot of trouble today." He shook his head. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was the right thing to do." His voice was calm, but steady. "I couldn't just walk away knowing I could help. That's all there is to it." The supervisor studied him, his eyes softening. "You got a lot of skill and humility. Not everyone has both. I learned early that life doesn't always let you have everything," the janitor replied. "You take what you need, what you can give, and you do your best." The woman from the jet approached, walking down the steps with her assistants in tow. She had slowed as she reached the hangar, clearly curious about the man who had saved their morning. She looked at him, then at the supervisor. "He did that?" she asked, pointing toward the janitor. "Yes," the supervisor said simply. "He noticed something we all missed. Saved the flight." Her eyes met his. For a moment, she studied him as if trying to understand how someone so quiet and unassuming could have that kind of knowledge. "And you're?" she asked. "I'm the janitor," he said softly. "I clean the terminals. That's my job now." She blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "The janitor?" she said, almost incredulously. The man who fixed the engine cleans floors? He nodded. I needed steady hours. My daughter needed me at home every night. Maintenance work didn't fit that life anymore. She glanced at her assistants and then back at him. You've given us all more than just a working jet, she said quietly. You reminded us that experience and talent can be hidden behind any uniform. He nodded politely, not seeking praise. I'm glad it worked out. One of her assistants finally spoke. How long have you been doing this job? About 3 years, he said. I moved here right after my daughter was born. She needed me. I've stayed ever since. She looked at him with a new kind of respect, recognizing not only the skill he had, but the sacrifices he had made. She could see the tiredness in his eyes, the quiet dedication. And you've done it without asking for anything? She asked. I don't need anything, he replied simply. Seeing her grow, being there for her, that's enough. The supervisor nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. Well, today, you reminded a lot of people that titles don't define skill or character. He looked down at his hand for a moment, as if considering what to say. Then he straightened. I just know what I know. I do what I can. That's all. The woman finally extended her hand to him. Thank you, she said sincerely, for your help, for stepping up, for not walking away. He shook it politely, giving a small, respectful smile. I'm glad it worked, he said again. She glanced at the supervisor and nodded. Make sure this man knows he's appreciated, not just by me, but by everyone here. People like him are rare. He felt a flicker of something inside him, a small warmth, but it didn't need to grow. He was not looking for recognition. He simply nodded. I appreciate that, he said quietly. The supervisor stepped closer to him, lowering his voice. Have you ever thought about coming back to maintenance? I mean, with skills like yours, we could use someone like you. He considered it for a moment. I've thought about it, he admitted softly. But right now, my daughter comes first. I can't be gone for long trips or long hours. Not yet. The supervisor nodded knowingly. Family comes first. I get it. But don't forget how valuable your experience is. You've still got it, even if you're not using it every day. He nodded, feeling a quiet truth in the words. Life had taught him to adapt, to put the people he loved first. But he knew that skill never left him. It was always there, quietly waiting for the right moment. The woman finally turned back to her assistants and began walking toward her vehicle. She looked back at him one more time, her expression soft but firm. You've done something most people never get the chance to do. You've reminded us what quiet competence looks like. He gave a small nod. Thank you, he said again. As she left, the supervisor patted him on the shoulder lightly. Don't sell yourself short, he said. Today, you reminded everyone here that being quiet doesn't mean being powerless. You're more capable than most people ever realize. He smiled faintly, not out of pride, but in quiet acknowledgement. I just did what I had to do, he said. That's all. He turned back to his cart and resumed his work, sweeping the floor near the hangar with deliberate, careful movements. Every step, every swipe of the mop felt grounded. The morning sun was stronger now, spilling through the windows and casting long shadows across the polished floors. The airport was busy again, people rushing past him, announcements echoing overhead, the usual rhythm of a day in motion. He moved through it all quietly, unnoticed by most, but carrying the weight of what had just happened silently inside him. The young technician, who had doubted him moments before, walked past with new respect in his eyes. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. A simple nod was enough. The supervisor lingered for a moment, watching him. Then he returned to his duties, leaving the janitor to his work. He paused briefly by a window, looking out at the runway where the jet had taken off. It was just a speck now, disappearing into the distance. The passengers would never know the man who had saved their flight, the man who had noticed a small detail that made all the difference. But he didn't need them to know. Recognition was never the reason he had stepped forward. It was about doing the right thing, about using his knowledge when it mattered, about keeping people safe. That was enough. That had always been enough. He finished wiping down a counter, then bent to sweep a corner. The floor gleamed in the sunlight, Everything was clean, orderly as it should be. He paused again, thinking of his daughter at home. She would be waiting for him soon, ready with questions, stories, and hugs. She didn't care about airplanes or engines. She cared about him being there. And for him, that was the most important thing in the world. The day continued, full of noise and movement, but he moved quietly through it, steady and calm. No one else would know the small story of skill, sacrifice, and quiet courage that had unfolded in the early morning. But that was fine. He didn't need anyone else to know. He had acted. He had done what was right. And that was all that mattered. As he continued his work, he felt a quiet sense of peace. The engines were running. The passengers were safe. The airport was functioning, and he had been part of it. For him, that quiet satisfaction was everything. And he carried it with him, silently, steadily, as he always had. The day passed slowly, the rhythm of the airport moving around him like water around a stone. The janitor continued his work quietly, mopping floors, restocking supplies, and wiping counters. Travelers came and went, rolling luggage behind them, speaking loudly on phones, laughing with companions, oblivious to man who had saved a flight earlier that morning. But he didn't mind. Recognition had never been his reason for acting. His satisfaction came from knowing he had done the right thing. By mid-afternoon, the supervisor found him again. "Can I have a word?" he asked. He nodded and followed him to a quiet corner near the hangar. The supervisor's expression was serious but kind. "I've been thinking about today," he said, "and about what you did. You proved something important. That experience and skill aren't about uniforms or titles. I want to offer you something." He tilted his head slightly. "What's that?" The supervisor smiled. "A part-time technical position. Flexible hours. You won't have to travel, but you'll get to use your knowledge, work with engines, and help out when needed." The offer hung in the air. It was tempting. It would allow him to reconnect with the work he had once loved. But it came with considerations. His daughter's schedule, her need for him at home, the balance he had worked so hard to maintain. "I appreciate it," he said finally, "but my daughter, she comes first. I can't risk long hours away." "Not yet." The supervisor nodded, understanding more than he said. "I get that, but don't forget, today, you reminded all of us that skill and integrity never go away. They're just waiting for the right moment." He nodded quietly, feeling the truth in those words. Life had given him limits, but it hadn't taken his abilities. His knowledge was still there, ready for the day it was needed again. Later that afternoon, the woman from the jet's company called the airport office. She asked to speak to him directly. She wanted to hear about his experience, about the choices he had made, and about the quiet courage he had shown. She listened intently as he spoke, and by the end of the call, she offered to help him get certifications renewed, to sponsor training, and to ensure he had the option to return to full maintenance work if he wished. He thanked her politely. "Right now, my priority is my daughter," he said. "Everything else can wait." The woman smiled, sensing the depth of his dedication. "That's admirable," she said. "And one day, when the time is right, we'll be here to support you. People like you don't come around often." As the day moved into evening, he pushed his cleaning cart toward the exit. The sun was low, casting a warm golden glow across the airport. Travelers were heading home or toward evening flights, employees finishing shifts or starting night work. He paused near the window and watched the jet take off in the distance, its engine strong and steady. He had been part of that moment. He thought of his daughter, waiting at home. She would be curious about his day, ask him questions, and perhaps not understand the quiet significance of what had happened. But that didn't matter. She would see him there, present, reliable, the one constant in her life. That was his reward. When he arrived home, his daughter ran to meet him at the door, her small arms wrapped around him tightly. "Daddy," she exclaimed, "I missed you." He hugged her back, smiling. "I missed you too, sweetheart." She pulled back just enough to look at him. "Did anything exciting happen today?" she asked, eyes wide with curiosity. He chuckled softly. "Nothing you wouldn't understand," he said. But inside, he carried the memory of the jet engines, the tension, the tiny detail that had made all the difference. He carried the respect of people who had underestimated him. and he carried the quiet knowledge that he had acted when it mattered most. He helped her with homework at the kitchen table, sat with her through her favorite cartoons, and listened as she told him about her day at school. All the while, the hum of life continued outside. The world moved on, unaware of the quiet hero in their midst. That night, after his daughter was asleep, he sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea. He thought about the morning, the jet, the choices he had made, and the people he had helped. There was no fanfare, no applause, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done the right thing. He reflected on the supervisor's words, the woman's call, and the subtle recognition that had followed him through the day. But the most important thought he had was simple. He was there for his daughter, and that mattered more than anything else. Life had given him challenges, choices that were not always easy, and moments that tested his patience and skill. But it had also given him the ability to act with integrity, to use his knowledge when it mattered, and to prioritize the people he loved. He knew that someday, when the timing was right, he could return to the work he loved fully. Until then, he would continue in his current life, balancing responsibilities, raising his daughter, and quietly demonstrating the power of skill, humility, and dedication. The next morning, he would wake before sunrise again, push his cart to the silent airport, and begin his shift. Travelers would come and go, announcements would echo, and the usual rhythm would resume. But he would carry with him the memory of the jet, the moment he acted, and the knowledge that small actions, careful observation, and quiet courage could make a big difference. He cleaned with care, moved with purpose, and lived with quiet dignity. The world around him might not always notice, might not always understand, but that didn't change the truth. He had made a difference, and in that difference he found peace. In that peace he found strength, and in that strength he found a life that mattered, not for fame or recognition, but for the people he loved and the choices he had made. He looked out the window one last time that night, watching the stars begin to shine over the runway. Somewhere, far above, jets were flying smoothly, carrying passengers who would never know the quiet janitor who had made their journey possible. But he didn't need them to know. He had acted. He had used his skill. He had prioritized what mattered most. And that, he thought, was enough. He turned off the kitchen light, checked on his daughter one last time, and sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the day. Life had given him more than he had expected. It had tested him. It had challenged him. And it had reminded him that courage, skill, and love often exist in the quietest of people, behind the simplest of uniforms. He went to bed that night with a sense of satisfaction, a calm mind, and a quiet hope. Tomorrow would be another day. The airport would be alive with movement, schedules, and sound. He would return to his work, continue his life, and continue being the father his daughter needed. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that whenever the time came, he could act again. He could use his knowledge, his experience, and his calm judgment to make a difference. Because that's what he had always done. For now, though he was home, his daughter slept peacefully. The world outside moved on. And he, a quiet man with a mop and a steady heart, carried with him a knowledge that even small, unnoticed actions could change the course of a day and sometimes even a life. The night settled over the house, soft and silent, carrying the promise of another sunrise, another shift, another chance to do what was right. And he, always ready, would be there to meet it.